Not all journeys begin with thunder. Some start in quiet moments beneath starry skies, where forgotten paths wait to be discovered. If you enjoy gentle quests and soft magic, like and subscribe for more bedtime stories. The first truth of Declan's world was stone. It was the foundation of the cottage he slept in, the low walls that patterned the green hills of Glen Cailleach, and the very dust that danced like captured starlight in the shafts of sun slanting through his workshop window. At 18, he was fluent in its silent language, a tongue he spoke not with his mouth, but with the rhythmic tapping of his mallet and the patient scrape of his chisels. Tap, tap, scrape. Tap. Scrape. It was the valley's heartbeat, and it was his own. His workshop was a sanctuary of stone and wood, leaning into the main cottage as if for support. The air inside was thick with the clean, mineral scent of worked rock and the fainter, sweeter smell of old pine shelves. A fine, silvery dust, the ghosts of 1,000 anxieties chipped away, coated everything, softening the sharp edges of the world. On these shelves sat the fruits of his labor, rows of worrystones, each one a unique testament to a villager's fear, each one shaped by empathy and honed by craft. He sourced his canvas from the river Lynn, which coiled its way through the valley floor. He'd spend hours waiting in the shallows, his trousers rolled to his knees, feeling for stones that had the right character. Not the flawed, angry ones, but the patient ones, the stones that had been tumbled and smoothed by the river's constant murmur until their history was worn away, leaving them ready to receive a new one. This afternoon, he was finishing a stone for Alara, the weaver whose hands now betrayed her with a relentless tremor. Her fear was of stillness, of the silence of her loom. Declan had chosen a piece of soapstone for her, soft and almost warm, its gray surface veined with gentle white lines like mapped coastlines of a peaceful country. His tools were extensions of his own fingers. The burin, its wooden handle worn smooth by his father's grip and now his own, found the stone's tension points. The riffler, with its curved, toothed face, smoothed away the rough memories of the chisel. As he worked, he did not think of stone. He thought of Alara. He summoned the memory of her laugh, the smell of the oatcakes she baked, the fierce pride in her eyes when she displayed a finished tapestry. He poured all the warmth of those memories, all his quiet respect for her, into the hollow he was carving. He imagined her fear as a coarse grain within the soapstone, and with every tap and every scrape, he was grinding it down, polishing it away, until all that remained was a perfect, silken depression, an invitation for a thumb to rest and find solace. This was the magic, as his father had taught him. It wasn't about enchanted rocks. It was about focused intention. The stone was a vessel, a tangible place to house an intangible pain, making the burden something that could be held, and perhaps, one day, set down. He wiped the finished stone on a soft leather cloth, its surface now gleaming dully in the light. It felt light, resolved. He wrapped it carefully in a scrap of wool and placed it in his satchel. He would deliver it on his way back from the river later. With the stone complete, a different silence fell upon the workshop. It was not the peaceful quiet of finished work, but a heavy, expectant hush. His eyes were drawn, as they were every evening, to a large, iron-strapped wooden box that sat apart from everything else, square in the center of his main workbench. It was not made of local pine, but of a dark, foreign wood, a gift from a sailor who had passed through long ago. It was where he kept the stone that was not for sale. The stone he did not shape, but which shaped him. Before he could confront it, he forced himself to remember. He closed his eyes and conjured an image of his brother Cian. Not the brother from the letters, but the real one. Cian, 3 years his senior, with a laugh that could startle birds from trees and a grin that was a flash of summer lightning. Cian, wrestling him in the high grass until they were both breathless and stained green. Cian, teaching him how to skip stones across the linn, his arm a whip-fast arc, making the flat pebbles dance 7, 8, 9 times before sinking. Cian, his arm slung around Declan's shoulder, pointing at the constellations, giving them new, ridiculous names. These were the memories he fought to keep. But they were fading, their colors bleached by the shadow cast from that box. With a sigh that seemed to stir the dust around him, he walked to the bench. His fingers trembled slightly as he lifted the heavy lid. There, nestled in a bed of faded, black velvet, was Cian's stone. It was a brutal thing, a jagged shard of black basalt he'd found years ago, high on the scree slopes of the morning peaks. It was a stone born of fire and pressure, sharp-edged and cold, a rock that seemed to consume the light around it, offering nothing back. It was a piece of the mountain's anger, and now, it was a library of his brother's pain. He had tried to carve it, at first. But the story it needed to tell was not one of smoothing, but of breaking. He reached for it, but hesitated. Not yet. The sun was still too high, the world still too bright. This was a task for the twilight, for the time between worlds when shadows grew long and the past felt closer than the present. He closed the lid, the soft click echoing like a cell door locking. The weight of what the evening held settled over him, a familiar shroud of dread. Dread was a physical thing. It began as a cold knot in Declan's stomach as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in wounded colors of orange and purple. It crept up his spine, tightening the muscles in his neck and shoulders. By the time the valley was awash in the blue ink of twilight, the dread was a low hum beneath his skin, a tuning fork struck by the impending ritual. He often asked himself why he did it. Cian had never asked him to. His letters were sparse, functional things, scraped onto the page in pencil. They never spoke directly of the horror. But the horror was there, in the tremor of the handwriting, in the things left unsaid between the lines, in the very smell of the paper that had traveled from that muddy, war-torn world. Declan did it because he couldn't not do it. He was a stonecarver. His purpose was to ease burdens, to stand by and do nothing while his brother, his other half, was being crushed felt like a betrayal worse than any pain the stone could inflict. It was his duty, his penance for being safe while Cian was not. He lit a single tallow lamp, its small flame pushing back the deepest of the workshop's shadows, and opened the iron-strapped box. He took out the basalt. It felt colder than the evening air, a shard of permanent winter. He sat on his stool, the stone a dead weight in his lap. He knew its terrain by heart. Each scar on its surface was a chapter in Cian's suffering. He ran his thumb over the first mark he'd ever made, a deep, spiraling groove he'd carved after the first letter arrived, the one describing the endless marches, the feeling of walking toward a horizon that never got closer. "The mud is a hungry thing, Deck," Cian had written. "It eats your boots." Another section was pockmarked with sharp, starburst fractures, each chip representing the concussive shock of explosions that Cian described not with sound, but with sensation. The air turns to a wall and hits you. It shakes the water in your own skin. A patch of frenzied cross-hatching represented the maddening itch of lice, the gnawing hunger, the claustrophobia of the trenches. Each mark was a prayer, an etching made of empathy, an attempt to draw the poison out and give it a home. For 2 years he had performed this ritual. He would take the stone, close his eyes, and let it speak to him. He would offer his own peace as a sacrifice, allowing the stone's stored memories to flood the void. Tonight, he began. He closed his fist around the unforgiving rock. The cold was immediate, seeping past his skin and into his bones. He took a steadying breath and opened his mind to the stone. The workshop faded. The gentle murmur of the river Lynn was replaced by a high-pitched ringing. The scent of stone dust became the acrid stench of cordite and stale sweat. He was no longer Declan, the carver. He was a vessel. He felt the phantom weight of a heavy pack digging into his shoulders, the chafing of a wet wool uniform against his skin. A bone-deep weariness settled into his limbs. He tasted grit and something metallic, like old blood, on his tongue. Images, fragmented and chaotic, flickered behind his eyelids, a sky filled with smoke, a line of gaunt faces, the terrifying emptiness of a field after a battle. He felt a jolt of primal fear, a frantic, animal terror that made his own heart hammer against his ribs. He felt the hollow ache of loneliness, the profound isolation of being surrounded by ghosts, both living and dead. He held on, anchoring himself with the image of Kian's laughing face from his childhood. He let the waves of second-hand trauma wash over him, through him, believing that for every drop of pain he absorbed, there was one less drop for his brother to bear. It was a foolish, desperate arithmetic, but it was all he had. When he could take no more, when his hand was cramped into a claw and his own spirit felt frayed and thin, he would gently, carefully, place the stone back in its velvet bed and lock the box. The recovery was slow. The phantom sensations would linger for an hour or more. He would sit, shivering, until the workshop felt like his own again. Food would taste like ash in his mouth. Sleep would be a shallow, restless affair. But today, something new waited for him. Propped against the box was a letter. It had arrived with the morning postman, and he had saved it, knowing it would change the geography of the stone. Its presence filled the room with a fresh and potent dread. The envelope was smudged, the corner stained with something dark. His hand shaking, he broke the seal. He unfolded the single, creased page. The pencil marks were faint, hurried. Deck. It's quiet now. Too quiet. Nothing but the wind for days. They say it's a good sign. It doesn't feel like it. The silence is louder than the shelling ever was. Pray for the rain to wash the ground clean. Kian. Declan read the words again, and then a third time. Too quiet. It wasn't the absence of war. It was a different kind of war. A war of waiting, of memory, of looking at what was left behind. A new and terrible landscape had just been revealed to him, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his soul, that the stone was waiting to be marked by it. The letter lay on the workbench, a pale scar in the lamplight. Each word was a stone dropped into the quiet pool of Declan's mind, the ripples spreading outwards into chilling uncertainty. Too quiet. He understood. It was the silence of the graveyard after the funeral, the silence of a room that would never again be filled by a familiar voice. It was the sound of what came after. This was a deeper wound than the violence, a more insidious poison. A desperate urgency seized him. The ritual tonight couldn't be the same. He couldn't just absorb the ambient pain. He had to seek this new silence out, find it, and give it a place in the stone before it consumed his brother whole. He felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it bordered on arrogant. He, Declan, the Stonecarver, would contain this, too. He snatched the basalt from its box, foregoing any gentle preparation. He sat, his back ramrod straight, and clutched the stone in his fist as if trying to choke a confession from it. He squeezed his eyes shut and poured all his focus, all his will, into the cold, dark rock, seeking the new memory. "Show me," he whispered into the dusty air. "Show me the silence." The stone responded. The transition was more jarring than ever before. He was ripped from his workshop and thrown into a memory so vivid it felt real. The air was damp and cold, heavy with the smell of wet ash and pine. He was sitting on a log, a rough wool blanket draped over his shoulders. Before him, a small, sullen campfire sputtered, its weak flames doing little to push back a night that felt absolute. The only sound was the wet hiss of the wood and a low, mournful wind sighing through skeletal trees. This was the quiet. He felt the warmth of a tin mug in his hands, but when he raised it to his lips, the liquid was cold. He saw other figures hunched around the fire, their faces hollowed out by shadow, their eyes staring into the flames but seeing something else entirely. No one spoke. The silence was a shared burden, a heavy blanket they had all pulled over themselves. Then, a new sensation. A presence. Declan felt himself look up, across the pathetic fire. A boy, he was no older than Declan himself, was staring back at him. His face was pale, streaked with mud, his eyes wide and vacant, reflecting the fire but none of its warmth. And the boy was laughing. It was the most horrific sound Declan had never heard. A silent laugh. The boy's shoulders shook, his mouth was open in a rictus of mirth, but no sound emerged. It was the purely physical motion of laughter, hollowed out, with all the joy and sound scraped away, leaving only the terrifying mechanics behind. It was the expression of a mind that had shattered. The perspective of the memory shifted violently. Declan was no longer an observer but a participant. He was looking down, not at the fire, but at his own boots, caked in mud and something dark and sticky that he knew wasn't just earth. A wave of grief, so profound and personal it felt like his own heart was being torn from his chest, crashed over him. This wasn't just a loss. It was the loss. It was the memory of surviving when the boy with the silent laugh, his friend, had not. It was the deafening silence of a world with one less soul in it. This grief, this silent, screaming loss, was too much. It was a pressure the stone had never been asked to bear. It surged from his mind into his hand, into the basalt. For a moment, he felt the stone resist, and then something inside it gave way. Crack. The sound was utterly alien. It wasn't the clean, controlled tap of his tools. It was a sharp, final, wrenching sound of failure. It was the sound of bone breaking, of ice splintering, of a promise shattering. It shot up his arm like a bolt of lightning. Declan's eyes flew open. He was back in his workshop, gasping for air, his heart hammering. He stared down at his hand. A hairline fracture, starkly white against the black, ran from one end of the basalt to the other. It was a lightning strike frozen in stone. He had broken it. He had failed. A new kind of terror, far worse than the second-hand fear from the stone, seized him. The cold in the room dropped. The memories were no longer contained. The acrid smell of smoke, the damp chill of the trench, the unbearable grief for the laughing boy, they were all loose now, leaking from the fractured stone into his sanctuary. They swirled around him, ghosts set free from their prison, and his workshop was no longer a safe haven but a haunted house. He scrambled back, dropping the stone. It fell to the floorboards and split cleanly in two. The two perfect halves lay there, their broken faces exposed, raw and vulnerable. He felt a wave of nausea. He had not contained the pain. He had broken the container, unleashing it. He paced the small space like a caged animal, his hands clutching his head. What had he done? What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't fix it. He couldn't hold the pieces. Their edges looked sharp as razors, and the raw grief radiating from them was unbearable. He had to get them out. Out of his workshop. Out of his life. An instinct, primal and powerful, rose through his panic. It was an idea that came not from his mind, but from his blood, from the ancient knowledge of the valley itself. When something is broken beyond repair, when a sickness is too great to be healed, you do not keep it. You give it back. You give it to the earth, the river, the clay. With a choked sob, he lunged forward and snatched the 2 pieces of the broken stone from the floor. They felt sharp and hot now, like fever things. He didn't bother with the box or the velvet. Clutching the shards in one fist, their edges digging into his palm, he threw open the workshop door and ran out into the night, a desperate flight from the ghost he had unleashed, heading for the one place he knew could wash the world clean. He ran. The moon was high and cold, a silver coin in the dark sky, and it lit his path in shades of gray and black. The familiar track down to the river Lynn felt alien under his frantic feet. The rustle of leaves in the wind sounded like whispers. The shadows of the trees seemed to reach for him like long, grasping fingers. The world he knew had been contaminated by the broken stone, its familiar comforts twisted into things of menace. The only sound that anchored him was the low, constant murmur of the river, growing louder as he drew closer, a promise of something other than the screaming silence he was fleeing. He half ran, half slid down the muddy bank, his boots sinking into the soft, wet earth. He landed on his knees at the water's edge, in a wide bed of blue-gray clay that gleamed slickly in the moonlight. His breath came in painful, ragged sobs. He opened his fist. The broken halves of the basalt lay in his palm, stark and accusing. His own blood welled up from where their sharp edges had cut him, mingling with the stone's dark history. This was a place of creation. He came here for the clay that would cradle his finished works, the soft earth that protected his instruments of peace. Tonight it would be a tomb. He looked at the 2 pieces, the clean line of the fracture a testament to a burden that had become absolute. He had tried to be a fortress for his brother's pain, but a fortress can still be broken. All his work, all his sacrifice, had ended here, in failure and rupture. Or had it? A new thought, quiet as the river's murmur, slipped into his mind. Perhaps the point wasn't to contain the pain forever. Perhaps the point was to hold it long enough for it to be ready for release. With his free hand, he began to claw at the clay. The substance was cold and yielding, pulling at his fingers with a soft, sucking sound. He dug a small grave, a hollow in the heart of the river bank. He worked with a strange, methodical calm, the panic receding, replaced by a solemn purpose. This was a new kind of craft. Not shaping, but burying. Not creating, but letting go. He took a final look at the stone fragments. Then, with a reverence that surprised him, he placed them in the hollow. He fitted them together, making the stone whole one last time, the fracture line a thin, pale seam. He laid it to rest. Then he began to push the wet, heavy clay over it. The earth enveloped the stone. It filled the etched lines and the pitted scars. It softened the sharp angles and soothed the violent history. He packed it down, smoothed it over with his palm until there was no trace of the grave, only a seamless patch of river clay, glistening under the moon. A finality settled over him. It was done. He felt empty. The phantom weight that had been his companion for 2 years was gone. The cold that lived in his bones had receded. The air was just air, cool and tasting of river water and damp earth. The quiet was just quiet. It was not peace, not yet. It was a profound and unnerving emptiness. An absence. Slowly, he pushed himself to his feet. He waded a few steps into the frigid river and plunged his hands into the current, washing away the clay and his own blood. He watched the gray and red clouds swirl away in the dark water, carried downstream, down toward the sea, gone. That night sleep was a deep, dreamless ocean. He did not toss or turn, plagued by the ghosts of the basalt. He simply fell into a profound stillness. And then, from the depths of that stillness, came a sound. It was not the tapping of a chisel or the murmur of a river. It was the warm, life-affirming crackle of a fire. Declan found himself sitting on a dry, fallen log. The chill of the river bank was gone, replaced by a comforting warmth. A generous campfire blazed before him, its flames dancing with energy, casting a golden, welcoming glow on a circle of tall pine trees. The air smelled of wood smoke and hot sap. A figure sat on the other side of the fire, casually whittling a stick with a small pocket knife. The firelight played across his familiar face, chasing away all shadows. It was Cian. Not the haunted soldier from the letters, not the grief-stricken ghost from the memory. It was his brother, whole and real. His hair was a mess, and there was a smudge of soot on his cheek, but his eyes were clear and bright with life. He looked up, saw Declan, and a slow, easy grin spread across his face, the real grin, the one that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "There you are," Cian said, his voice exactly as Declan remembered it, warm and laced with gentle humor. "Got lost?" Declan could not find his voice. 1,000 questions, a universe of fear and love, were lodged in his throat. Cian chuckled, a real, resonant sound that warmed the air. "Don't look like you've seen a ghost, December. It's just a fire." He gestured with his knife toward Declan's hands. "What are you holding so tight?" Declan looked down at his own hands. For the first time, he realized they were resting on his knees. They were open. Empty. Light. The weight was gone. He looked back up at his brother, and a wave of pure, unburdened understanding washed through him. The burial wasn't a failure. It was a release. It wasn't an act of surrender. It was an act of trust, trust in the earth, in the river, in the possibility of healing. Cian's smile softened. He seemed to understand everything. "You don't have to carry a deck," he said softly, his voice full of an old, brotherly love. "It was never yours to carry." He tossed the stick he'd been whittling into the fire. It landed among the glowing embers, sparked brightly, and was consumed by the flames. He held his own hands out to the warmth, open and empty, just like Declan's. Then he laughed, a full, free sound of pure joy that echoed in the peaceful, dreaming woods. Declan awoke to the gray light of dawn filtering into his workshop. The sound of his brother's laughter still seemed to hang in the air, a warmth that the morning chill could not touch. A single tear traced a clean path through the stone dust on his cheek. He felt the emptiness inside him filling up, not with dread or pain, but with a quiet, steady hope. The work was not over. But it had changed. He was no longer a keeper of pain. He was a carver, waiting to shape the stone of his brother's return.